our laws as it pertains to substances are draconian and bizarre. Psychopaths start this way. He was an alcoholic because of social media and pornography, PTSD, love addiction, fentanyl and heroin. Ridiculous.
I'm a doctor, for sake. Where the hell do you think I learned that?
I'm just saying, you go to treatment before you kill people. I am a clinician. I observe things about these chemicals. Let's just deal with what's real. We used to get these calls on Loveline all the time. Educate adolescents and to prevent and to treat. You have trouble you can't stop and you want help stop it, I can help. I got a lot to say. I got a lot more to say.
That's right. Welcome everybody to Ask Dr. Drew. Do call now, and we're here again. We hope to share with. We hope you will share this with your friends. And if you did sign up at drdrew.tv, you probably got an email or a text from us. I'll be taking calls intermittently. Hopefully, the first part of the show here. Second part of the show, I'm going to introduce my daughter to you, as well as Duncan Trussell. If you guys know Duncan Trussell. He is a long-standing friend of mine, and he has a lot of interesting ideas about hallucinogens, which is what we're going to kind of focus on today. And in the second hour, I'm going to bring a psychiatrist in here who uses psychedelics and hallucinogenics for therapeutic purposes. And then Dave Navarro, a very special guest, may call in that second hour with some of his own ideas about all this and allow him to share that for you. And with you, we do also a daily show called Daily Dose, which is it's not interactive the way this is, where I can take your calls. I can watch your comments, which I can do right now, by the way, and I am watching everybody. Well done at the Jersey Shore. I see you all now. Duncan is awesome. Paulina, there's some nice comments for you as well. I can see your comments on Periscope, Facebook, Twitch, wherever you are. That's where we are, and I can see the comments there. But you can also call in. That number, of course, is 984-2-Dr. Drew, 984-237-3739, and I'll try to take all the calls I can. Obviously, I've got a very packed show with material and guests and all, so I apologize if today I don't get as many guests on the phone as I like to. We are probably going to do a very special bonus show at the end in a couple of hours and just take calls, because I'm not going to get to a lot of calls, I suspect, during this particular show. Even though it's called Ask Dr. Drew, you're not going to be asking Dr. Drew that much. I will get to some of you on hold right now. I see you, and I will try to get to. The other thing is, we do a show just like this, a streaming show on all the platforms called Daily Dose. Usually we are midday, though sometimes we're doing it in the evening. We are going to be traveling a bit in the next few weeks, and when we travel, we will only do it on one platform. As it is, we're able to, if we're doing it from this studio, we're able to stream on Periscope and Facebook and Twitch and Mixer and YouTube and everybody. But when we go out on the road, we're probably just going to be doing Periscope. So if you want to find us, we will be on Periscope. Miss Producer Susan Pinsky, will there be a blast out for the Periscope?
Well, we'll mention it on Twitter and Facebook. We'll just go to Periscope and follow Dr. Drew, and then it'll just pop up as soon as we start it on your phone.
All right. In addition, I want to thank our sponsors this week, courtesy of Sand Needle Destruction Devices. Go to needledestructiondevice.com. Get more details or click on the link at drdrew.com. We do appreciate the support of the sponsors to support this show. The needle destruction device, particularly for me, is a kind of a dream come true. I've been trying to figure out ways my entire career to eliminate needle sticks as a health issue. The needle destruction device that I am working with does that. You just put the needle in this device, it incinerates it, and it's no longer a biohazard. Everybody that deals with needles should have one of these devices. Check it out at needledestructiondevice.com. And also a thanks goes out to Social CBD. For a limited time, you get 20% off at checkout with drdrew.com/socialcbd. Use the code drdrew at checkout. And also check out all of our podcasts at drdrew.com. Me and Adam do a show every day. I told you I'd be talking for a while about all this junk before I get to the show. Also, Dr. Drew After Dark at your mom's house. I know a lot of fans of that show are around, and we got a new tour coming up with Robert Paul Champagne. Epic, epic, epic. And as I said, sign up for this show. We're going to try to do this regularly, as I said, and we appreciate your support. We appreciate you being part of this. Why don't I first welcome my very special guest, which is my daughter, Paulina Pinsky. Paulina is a writer and can be found at Ms. Picky, MIZPIGGY 111. Wow. Her website is paulinapinsky.com, where people can do what?
Oh, so many things. You can read what I've written already, or you can sign up for my newsletter and keep track of what I'm up to. I tend to send a newsletter out every week at least. Also on Medium. If you are interested in reading my pieces on Medium, I'd be exceptionally grateful.
Medium, do not confuse that with calling out and mediums.
No. Medium.com.
Also, you can find her on Instagram and Twitter.
My mother producing me. I love this.
Yes.
M-I-Z Peggy.
And also your coaching and all that stuff. Tell them about that.
Yes, I'm actually a writing coach. So if you are interested in pursuing your craft and becoming a better writer, I am available for one-on-one coaching.
Tell them about your pedigree so they know what they're getting.
This is excellent. I love my parents being like, more.
Wait, Paulina, first, could you put the mic a little closer to your mouth? Thank you.
There we go.
This is what it's like to be a
to
child
be you.
in
People
Hollywood.
ask you,
Stage mama.
People ask what it's like to be you, and there it is.
This is it. It's being heavily produced all the time. Anyways, just stare into the camera. So I have my MFA in nonfiction creative writing from Columbia University. I focus on essay writing and family writing. So eventually I will be writing a book about our family. So get ready for that.
Thank you.
Get ready for that. However, I dabble in everything, poetry, fiction, nonfiction. Ultimately,
but the coaching is around that stuff,
too. The coaching
right?
is around that stuff. I mean, I'm primarily a nonfiction writer. However, I'm able to help in any sort of medium. I would create a program specifically tailored to what you want to pursue.
And Miss Producer, is it time to bring my other guest in here? Or do I do calls? Should I bring Duncan?
Bring him in.
Duncan Trussell. You know him from Drunk History, Comedy Tour, Joe Rogan Show, his podcast, Duncan Trussell Family Hour. Find him on Twitter at Duncan Trussell and at DuncanTrussell.com. Duncan, there you are, man. How's it going?
Great. How are you?
Good. Oh,
Can
my
you
God.
see me?
Loud and clear. Everything is perfect. The
Wow,
mandala
amazing.
behind you looks amazing. That's the
Beautiful.
Duncan
Thank
Trussell
you.
family. Tell them about the podcast first off.
It's just we have conversations with. I have conversations with spiritual teachers, Buddhists, Satanists, comedians. It varies
Satanist
wildly.
comedians go in one category and the spiritual advisors in the other. Nice.
Yes.
Are you getting
Well, they
some
all
weird
mix
feedback?
together sometimes.
Are you getting weird feedback?
I'm not
or
getting
something?
feedback.
Okay, good. I want to make sure you hear me clearly. Now, I fell in love with Duncan when he did one of the first Drunk Histories on, it was actually a web series then, and he did a series on Tesla.
Oh,
Have you seen the
amazing.
Tesla?
No, I haven't seen it.
Oh, my God. Duncan, Tesla.
Yeah, that was amazing. I got really way too wasted on that one. Derek, and I don't know if this is true or not, but because of my episode, they had to start hiring a nurse to do breathalyzers
Oh,
because
wow.
we didn't
Duncan,
look
is
at the
your phone
alcohol
on?
content of absinthe.
Is your phone on? Yeah, turn your phone
That's
sign
oh
down.
my God! Hang on a second. Is that my phone? Unbelievable. Did I just let my phone run during this? So sorry.
At least we solved the problem. I like that.
I didn't know what it was coming from. I thought it was on your side.
So watch the Tesla episode. You can find it on YouTube. It's unbelievable, and it's unbelievably accurate. I learned about Tesla from that episode. You, John C. Reilly. Who else was in that one? The guy from Back
Crispin
to the
Glover.
Future. Crispin Glover. Oh my God, it's such a great. And then I had the great honor of playing Derek Waters. Derek Waters is the mastermind behind Drunk History, of drinking with Duncan on his last Drunk History. Was that your last one, or have you done one since?
No, I've done one since.
I'm so mad you guys didn't bring me into that.
I know. I didn't like it without you. It was that, that was really one of the most surreal moments because I've been a fan of yours before we became friends, but it was very you never think when you're thinking what might happen to you out here that you might end up getting hammered with Dr. Drew. So that was a really interesting night.
And talk about dolphins and weird ass experiments and LSD with dolphins, right?
John Lilly, yeah, all that strange stuff, the dolphin experiments. Yeah, he was really, what I heard though is that he was more interested in ketamine than LSD, actually. And that, and yes, isn't that fascinating? But they don't mention that as much. He was towards the end of his life. Apparently, he was injecting ketamine into his body like 3 or 4 times a day at least.
Oh my God!
I'm not sure that's therapeutic. I'm just saying that sounds a little more.
No, he was trying to go home.
Oh, oof. Well, so talk to me. We recently lost Ram Dass, who I know was somebody that figure large in your thinking and some of the stuff you would talk about on your podcast. Talk to me about your basic philosophy on hallucinogenics.
Okay. Well, it's good to mention Ram Dass, because Ram Dass and Tim Leary, his name was Richard Alpert, and they were in the forefront of studying psychedelics as a potential therapeutic tool. And so in those days, it was so new that nobody really understood what it was. These were, people who'd been studying psychology for so long, and suddenly here these substances start popping up into the mainstream a little bit that seem to give you a direct access to the subconscious. Some people speculated that it was a way to induce schizophrenia, which was very useful from a scientific perspective, because maybe by becoming quote a lunatic, by becoming psychotic, you could get an insider's perspective on what some of your patients were going through. But then I think what started happening is that as they began to study these substances, they began to change, and reevaluate their life purpose. And so that was when Alpert and Tim Leary got kicked out of Harvard, and it was a big scandal. And then it was an interesting divergence that happened between the two, because Tim Leary sort of maintained a kind of at least the guise of scientific materialism, even though you might not think that about him. And Alpert went to India and became a seeker and met his guru, Neem Karoli Baba, came back here and wrote Be Here Now.
Yes.
And became a great spiritual teacher.
Good.
Isn't it wonderful?
It's transcendent. I mean, I read about a book a week, and that book specifically has gripped me from my chest in my core and shaken me. And I think it's something that is really should be widespread now, especially in this moment in which everyone feels so dislodged from anything. It feels like a very grounding ideology to follow.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that's a fantastic assessment of that book. And, to get into the topic, what I think the topic is, Ram Dass told this amazing story. It was one of the big awakening moments in his life, which was he was at a party. I think he was at a party with Tim Leary and like Alan Watts, all these like 60s like intellectuals and thought leaders, and they were taking synthetic psilocybin. And Ram Dass goes and sits on a couch because he's beginning to really trip out. And he starts thinking about the things that he loves, his status, being a, handsome, respected Harvard professor, all the identity points that he was really connecting to. And something about this trip, they just started blinking out, these aspects of his identity that were what he considered to be him. And so as he tells this wonderful story about how essentially he gets to some core Richard Alpertness and then looks down at his body, and his body starts disappearing. And at that point, he had to deal with this, I don't know what you would call it, a non-bodily identified consciousness that was outside of his personality, outside of his ego. And he was trying to understand that from like a perspective of Western psychology. What is this?
And so people now talk about that in the realms of mindfulness and meditation too, as sort of either pure being or awareness of awareness. Does that make sense?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. Yeah. Fundamental goodness is another name for it. Some kind of like, it's like, I don't know, this is a really dumb example, but maybe it's a little bit like wiping all the apps off your phone. In this case, the phone is your identity, and the apps are all the various things that you use to contextualize and understand your reality. When all that stuff gets lifted away, a lot of people experience some relief. Neurotic people in particular experience some relief from that.
And so this is where you and I always end up, right? Which you have with these interesting what are potentially therapeutic sort of modalities and interventions and observations. And then what I go to as a physician is, but we don't know the risk. And so when we start talking about changing fundamentally who a person is, you're talking about changing their brain. And that always scares me as something that, either we don't have much control over, we don't know the longer term consequence. I've seen severe problems from people who use a lot of hallucinogens. Is a little a problem? We just really don't know yet.
How much is
that's true.
We don't know what a lot is. That's part of the problem. I by a lot, I mean, I took care of people that were in famous rock bands in the 60s and were doing lots of it every day, and ended up in nursing homes because they were so impaired, and impaired in kind of a global, strange way. Like it wasn't strictly cognitive. They just became unable to sort of take care of themselves. Very, very
I think
strange. Go ahead.
One of the problems with those examples, I think, is that, especially if you're talking about rock stars, is you're dealing with so many different substances, so many different experiences that those substances are being used within. Who knows how many of it is, how much, a lot of the damage is from speed, cocaine. These are really
Speed,
alcohol.
Sure. But yep, you're absolutely correct. Alcohol in massive amounts over a long period of time will do exactly the same thing. Speed does something a little different. Speed causes mood problems and memory problems. Cocaine causes strokes, so it doesn't really cause the kind of damage we see with the other two. And then you're in the hallucinogenic class, which one and which one does what. We don't, probably psilocybins are much safer than LSD, probably. But what was you said? Who knows what? That's the bottom line. Who knows? That's the problem.
Right. I know as a doctor. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to get a psychiatrist in here in 45 minutes, and I'm going to try to talk to her who's using some of this stuff and see what she says. So it'll be interesting.
Well,
go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No,
I think one important, for me, I love psychedelics. I respond well to psychedelics. I enjoy them. I use them recreationally. I use them spiritually. I don't use them as much as I used to, though. I've sort of, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. I feel like I've gotten a lot from them. I use them every once in a while. And also I know the ones that don't go well. I'm not, honestly, I'm not a big fan of mushrooms. I don't like them as compared to like LSD or some of the other psychedelics out there.
That's really weirdly the opposite of what most people say, right?
Well, yeah. So it's a hilarious. I always know I'm in the right place if I find myself talking about mushrooms versus LSD, like I'm talking about sports teams, because then I'm with a future friend. That's a cool thing to get in an argument about.
How are the Chiefs doing anyway?
I have a friend who's a psychiatrist, and he does psychedelic medicine, and he is really passionate about getting the message out there that it's called psychedelic assisted psychotherapy.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about. He's a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, though, this guy. Right?
What's that?
This guy's a psychologist.
My friend's a psychiatrist.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know. I never looked at his.
Well, people get that very confused, and it is a very different kind of a perspective. And I do know a bunch of psychologists that are using exactly what you're talking about and claim great results with trauma, particularly, which is one of the great challenges in psychological therapies, right?
Yeah, that's right. And anyway, regardless of his credentials, but I'm positive he is. What I love about what he says is, what's wonderful about what's happening right now is that the genie's out of the bottle. They've allowed a lot of studies to happen with psilocybin, MDMA, ketamine. They're getting great results, and they're finding out what parts of the brain it affects, what are the optimal doses. Some of the optimal doses are not what you would think. And but one of the things he's worried about is that we're going to suddenly have this new class of pseudo shaman / psychologist person who starts popping up, imagining that they can administer psilocybin and give the
ayahuasca or
whatever
and that stuff. Yeah, that's the whole thing. Well, that's really interesting. I worry about that too, right? Because it is not there's not guidelines for it yet, so people can do whatever they want.
That's right. Exactly. That's I'm an old man now. I've got a kid now, so I'm not like I used to be, which is like just nitrous and acid together. You'll see the Matrix, man. Now I'm more like, and again, I'm not trying. Anybody who loves these things, Terrence McKenna said he feels sorry for people who've never taken a psychedelic in the way he would feel sorry for someone who's never had sex. It's a fundamental human experience, and it's glorious. And I agree with him wholeheartedly. But when we start talking about what's happening now, everyone forgets the hard work that goes into going to a psychologist, and the amount of time you have to put in, and the deep work you have to do on yourself to get inside where the trauma is, so to get opened up enough and to get the tools you need, so that when the psychedelic experience is being administered, you can you're trained up, so to speak, and the real healing can happen in that. And they're finding out that the combination of these two things, which underground psychologists have known for a long time, really has spectacular results in treating not just PTSD, but depression, marriage issues, and addiction. I'm sure you know about all that stuff.
Yeah, and again, I know about it in sweeping, vague terms, because I hear anecdotes. No published data yet, and we'll have it soon, as you say. The genie's out of the bottle. We'll have it someday, and I'm fascinated to see how that works. And so we're talking about ayahuasca and ibogaine for addiction. We're talking about MDMA for relationships. We're talking about psilocybin and LSD for end of life dread, which that's clearly where they have data right now. By the way, they have data that shows, yes, they show that if you are having horrible anxiety around a terminal prognosis, it really helps things. It really does. And who cares what the long-term effects are in that case, right? I mean, we don't have to worry about, are there going to be cognitive difficulties 5 years down the line? If you have 6 months to live, who cares? We're just trying to help that person deal with that. But you always used a metaphor to me. Sorry, Paulina, we're just going on here. We're old buddies.
No.
So,
yeah, Paulina, really sorry.
Home, white men talking,
Oh my God, you're right though. That is what we're doing. We're not. The camera's not even on your daughter.
I was like, I'm here.
Go ahead.
But also, I don't know if you want me to confess what my opinions are.
Go ahead. Go ahead. No.
I will say I did mushrooms in Amsterdam. I watched a lily die and rebloom before my eyes, and that sort of
Duncan, whoa.
It was awesome. But I also was able to look at my life as a full narrative, and I was able to see what my purpose is, and sort of it cemented the moment that I was in graduate school at the time, and I was in Amsterdam, so life was good. So I think because I was in a place where I was safe and I was in a stable mind space, I was able to engage with the psychedelic in a way that was actually spiritually fulfilling. And I think more than anything, I kind of have a problem with using things unintentionally just for entertainment, especially when it comes to psychedelics. Having an intention, which it makes me feel very new age, but acting with intention, you're able to manifest something for yourself, right? And so if you go into a psychedelic experience with the intention of self-exploration and healing, it can be a very, very spiritual and grounding process, in my experience at least.
How has it helped you with writing and creativity? Have you noticed have you ever used it for that?
Maybe. Yes. This is like low-key my teenage nightmare playing out, being on my father's podcast talking about drug use, but here we are.
No. There's a meta level to this, though, you'd never imagined, which was Duncan is doing the interviews. That's the part. That's the part that puts a real flavor to this whole thing. So go ahead, you guys.
Yeah. For creativity, my first manic episode, which I had summer of 2017, kind of cracked open my creativity.
Do you think that was related to the substances?
No.
How do you know?
I was on an antidepressant, and the dosage was too high, and so it was a reaction to actually my antidepressants. But during that period of time, I discovered painting, which sounds so ridiculous, but it was this pure, unadulterated expression that wasn't... I mean, I'm a trained dancer, I'm a trained singer, I'm a trained writer. So it was the only sort of medium in which I didn't feel restricted in. And so that being said, I have dabbled in high psychedelics and painted, and everything sort of takes on this sort of spiritual iconography unintentionally. I actually have pieces. I have pieces for sale on my website if you are interested, anyone. But all of my art feels like channeling in a certain way, and psychedelics sort of allow me to channel more. Like I believe that I'm channeling more.
So let me get from that to Duncan's metaphor, not a metaphor so much as his description of how, maybe you've changed your mind, Duncan, I don't know, but you always talked about this way you thought psychedelics should be used as that elevator metaphor. Remember that?
Oh yeah. Well, that was something Ram Dass would talk about, because those days. This was before the war on drugs. This was before like the deep conditioning that the voodoo conditioning the state has put in so many different people's brains regarding all drugs, and they really did think that they had found a nootropic that was going to potentially transform society in a matter of years.
You're talking back now to what's his name?
Alpert and Leary.
Alpert,
yeah.
But Leary was one that really championed that stuff. But
And
by the way,
Alpert was.
Let me just say, and this really bugs me a little bit. The job of a psychologist or a psychiatrist is the clinical care of a patient. It is not transform society. And a lot of horrors have been done by psychiatry in the name of transforming society. Trust me, that's all history that's being acted out on our streets. That's where homelessness came from. I'll talk more about that in maybe a little while.
Oh my God. I mean, even unintentionally, these experiments, I mean, look up Kaczynski was at Harvard.
Yes.
He was subject to these crazy, at the time it wasn't the CIA, it was the OSS.
Yes.
But I can't remember his name, a professor at Harvard was blasting Kaczynski.
At the Kentucky Center, the treatment center in Kentucky. Is that where it was?
I'm confused about.
I think it was at Harvard.
No, I think they went down to Kentucky for. But anyway, there was horrible stuff.
They took the Unabomber down to Kentucky.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is one of the fascinating things about these substances is, and especially back then, they change the observer. So if you want to get into them from a scientific perspective, and you become the subject, then you will begin to transform. And if you don't have the right group of people around you, if you're a narcissist, if you're manic, if you're whatever, then it can inflame that narcissism. And then next thing you know, you think you're Jesus. I mean, this is a classic, I'm sure, how many times have you had someone call you up, Dr. Drew, and tell you that they think they're the Christ or that they're going to change the world, and they're in a big hurry?
Right. And when people, and usually that's all kinds of psychiatric conditions, but if somebody has something like that induced by a chemical, I worry what we're doing to their brains, and it makes me worried about everybody who uses these things. So that and not to say that negates therapeutic value. There's always risk with any substance that people ingest for a therapeutic purpose. We just don't know this one yet. But finish the elevator metaphor, if you would.
Oh yeah. So anyway, I only brought that up because they were taking vast quantities of these substances, and with LSD, your tolerance goes up really quickly.
That's true.
They were doing it every day, right?
Every day they were drinking it. So that's the level and they were, Leary was reporting going back into his DNA, and going into his ancestral roots and stuff. But what they were realizing, and Alpert was really good at articulating this, is that no matter what, you still have to come down. So he compared it to this elevator. It's like taking an elevator to this heightened state of consciousness. You experience, universal consciousness. You experience merging with the totality of all things. You experience a kind of beautiful, harmonious connection to nature. But then you come down. Inevitably, you come down. And when you come down, you're back in the world. From their experiments, one of the sayings that emerges, who's going to do the dishes? Because somebody can't, someone's got to do the dishes.
That's right.
Someone's got to, and so this was where the big split happened with Alpert and Tim Leary. It wasn't a split. They stayed friends for their entire lives, but Alpert realized that the psychedelics were not going to keep you high permanently, high in the positive sense, in the sense of being, no longer engrossed in the story of you and the implicit selfishness that goes along with being human. He wanted a way to have a more permanent effect that was probably a little less chaotic. And so that's he went to India with LSD and started giving it to meditators to find out what they thought it was. But yeah, his thing is, you can go up on the elevator, but you always got to come back down.
And I would argue that a meditative discipline would be one of the ways to get control over that elevator, right?
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. Exactly. It's just a more,
Holistic.
Sometimes I think
holistic, call it.
holistic. Yeah. And I'm not trying to create some hierarchy between psychedelics and spirituality, which is actually, I think sometimes a rift between the psychedelic community and the spiritual community. The psychedelic community sometimes thinks the spiritual community is just like passive, doing spiritual bypass, fooling themselves. When, Terrence McKenna used to say, tell this story about it's like a guy was studying with a guru, and he went off into the forest and meditated for 15 years and came back to his guru, now capable of walking on water. And so he showed off to his guru. He's like, I have 15 years of discipline. Now I can walk on water. And his guru said, the ferry costs a nickel, And so that was McKenna's idea with mushrooms is, listen, sure, go ahead. Go to Dharamsala, go to the Himalayas, go into the jungles, meditate for 20 years, gain some endogenous psychedelic capacity, but I can buy 5 dried grams of psilocybin and instantaneously communicate with hyperdimensional entities. And so this is where a rift is between these two communities. But in my old age, I think I just don't have time to do 6-hour mushroom trips.
But more importantly, you've founded the grounding that they're talking about, these philosophers, which is what's important is taking care of your daughter, do the parenting, and get the diapers changed, get the food, get
that is exactly right.
Do the dishes.
Forrest is his son.
What's a son? I beg your pardon. Are we going to throw a picture up of your child? By the way, he's so cute.
We can't. We don't put his picture up.
Oh, he's so cute. All right,
Thanks.
Here's the deal. I want to now thank you for all that. Are we all three sort of?
I think I heard that you would meditate with Ram Dass, and I think that's really cool. Right? Is that true? Is that a rumor that I heard that's fair?
Well, yeah, I got really lucky. I did get to, we go to these retreats and hang out with him and all the wonderful people that would come there. And I got really lucky. And
in Hawaii?
Well,
yes, in Hawaii.
Oh.
Let me just say, okay, Miss Pinsky.
Yes, sir.
Now that I'm feeling jealous of Mr. Duncan, let me tell you what your father did, which is that he got to know Ram Dass's niece, who's a documentarian, and we went out and tried to create a documentary about the therapeutic uses of hallucinogens with Ram Dass featured in it, and nobody would do it.
Look at Dad flexing.
Nobody would do it, which was very disappointing.
Cool
we thought it was a layup because people are interested in this stuff. Yeah. But Sasha Alpert and I went out and tried to pitch this thing, and for whatever reason, we couldn't get it done. Isn't that weird?
Well, maybe now's the time with the Ram Dass documentary coming out on Netflix. I watched
there's
it.
a whole bunch of them out there. There's a whole bunch of Ram Dass documentaries, though, and I don't know if I don't know what it is, frankly. And to me, it's fascinating stuff, and I don't know why the average person isn't terribly interested in it. But Duncan, I'm going to go to some calls. Okay, I want to switch gears a little bit here for a few minutes.
Cool.
Before I do, anything coming up on your podcast we should be aware of? Other topics than hallucinogenics?
Oh, well, I mean, it varies week to week. You never know. I mean, sometimes we're talking about manifestation. Sometimes we're talking about magic. I just interviewed Ian Edwards, who's just a brilliantly funny comic. You're coming up on the podcast soon. And we've got a show coming out on Netflix that is based on the podcast that you're in. And
it's so funny. It's so funny. It's so much fun. Let him tell you what it is. It's fantastic.
I can't wait for you to see it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's like one giant acid trip.
Yeah, it is.
yeah. And spent a couple of weeks in the sound booth with Duncan. It was so much fun, man. It was really good.
Yeah, it was the best. That was so fun.
And you had an amazing team of creative people there. I mean, they were just so.
Thank you.
Oh my God, they were so on it.
Pendleton Ward from Adventure Time. He created Adventure Time. He's an authentic genius. He
started talking to me, and I'm like, "Who is that guy? What is he? How does he know what that? He knew exactly what he wanted all the time." Yeah.
It was magic. It was so fun. Thank you so much for doing it, Dr. Drew. Really, it was just so cool to get to work with you.
Turns out it's going to be startling to people, I suspect. So I have a call that's been on hold for quite. Hope so. A gentleman, I believe he's a veteran, and has a question for us. Let's get into this. Ethan, thank you for waiting. What's going on?
Hey, Drew, thanks for taking my call. Big fan. I've loved you on Loveline. I love all the stuff you're doing with your mom's house. So this is awesome. My question is, a couple months ago, I heard you on Fox News discussing the homeless problem, and you were very adamant in explaining to people that it's not a housing crisis; it's a mental health issue. And I agree with you, but I also think that housing is an issue, and I want to know, how you propose or how you would solve this problem. Like, how do you give someone that's homeless that needs, maybe medication or therapy?
Yeah,
how do you do that if they have no place of residence?
Well, let me just frame that there are billions of dollars on the sidelines ready to go to help people. They just don't know what to do with it yet. And the federal government, the city, and the county, at least down here in Southern California, all have more than enough space and enough environments in which to take care of people. They just have to. The problem is, and this is the problem, the people, we're not talking about the transiently homeless. There are people that are down on their luck and are economically distressed and end on the streets. The average duration on the street for that population is 3 months. We're talking about the chronically homeless who are dying at the rate of 3 a day on the streets of Los Angeles today. 3 will die while we're sitting here talking. That's the part that makes me crazy. And that group is largely a resistant population. They suffer from something called anosognosia, which is a block in the ability to understand what's happening to them as a result of their illness, or seeing the illness, or seeing how the illness operates. It's a feature of the illness. For instance, when you go out, one of the things about drug addicts on the street, only 10% of them ever get treatment. 10%. And when you go out and interview that 90% that doesn't get treatment, you ask them, why don't you get treatment? Why don't you access what's available? 80% of them, 80% of the 90% say, why would I? I don't need treatment. What's the problem? They want to keep doing it. That's part of the addiction. Same thing is true of schizophrenia and certain states of bipolar. It's anosognosia, and we have privileged that to the point we are privileging that to the point that we are allowing people, or committing them to die. So we need to have an environment of care for sure. I would urge everybody to look at something called the Trieste Plan, which is a community-based vocational rehab, largely outpatient. By the way, some people could be treated from their tents if we had outpatient treatment, and they very quickly would not want to be in their tents anymore once they get the treatment going. So, it's the prioritization. Sorry, could you say that again? What program that is? Trieste Plan, Trieste, Italy. Everyone sort of points to that as that's the model for what we should be doing for homeless. And I probably know. Look, it's all psychiatric hospital. It's all one version or another of a well-run psychiatric hospital. And the problem is, people don't want it. That's the problem. The LA County supervisors went out with a bank of showers for homeless, and they found that to get one homeless person into one shower, it took an average of 14 contacts. That's just showering. There's an illness there creating that block, and we are ignoring that and allowing people to die. If it was dementia causing that block, we would be rushing in to treat these people. But because it's schizophrenia causing it, or drug addiction, well, you can't touch them. And that's insane. And I've been to Sacramento. John Morlock has been to Sacramento twice with family members galore who have resources, and they want to bring their loved one home and get them care for and get a place to live and feed them. And the state of California told them to effing take a hike. Take a hike. We're not going to help you. That is bizarre. That is beyond catastrophe. And that's the stuff that makes me crazy. So that's the shorthand version of it. I gave a lecture on C-SPAN where I talk about the history of how we get into this. If you want to see that, the whole lecture's there. So I'll be up in Sacramento, by the way. Thank you, Drew. All right, man. A week from, and by the way, you're a veteran, true? Is that true, Ethan?
I am. That is true. I was in the Navy for 5 years.
Thank you for your service, and thank you for your service.
I'm telling you, being on the ship, listening to you and all your podcasts with Adam and Drew show, it's kept me sane. So and Duncan too. I'm a fan of his. The military members love the podcast. So
awesome. What do you think about the UFOs the Navy picked up?
Duncan. Man,
It's true.
Record
You know what I'm
scratch.
talking? Look it
Yeah, I
up.
know what you're talking about. Go ahead. Let's see what he says. Ethan.
Wait, sorry, the USOs?
UFOs.
I didn't hear that.
Those.
Oh, the
Okay.
Dude, I haven't heard that yet, but I'm down to hear about some aliens, you know.
Aliens. Well, no.
Listen,
all right, man. Thank you for your service, and thank you for the focus on the veterans. A number of the veterans that are on the streets have neurological issues.
Yes, exactly.
Neurological issues that you can't see on the surface that are being neglected. And again, that's neglect. That is not allowing people to live how they want to live. That's neglect, and no other country neglects sick people. We do that. It's ridiculous. Sorry.
Listen, all I have to say is if we're on a planet and we're life forms and we're sentient beings, who's to say that there aren't aliens on other planets?
Yeah, but will they be carbon-based? Will they be selenium-based?
Why are you some kind of carbon bigot? What do you care? What do you care what they're made out of?
Wait, I'm more than a bigot. I'm a carbon apologist. I'm a carbon because carbon has really special properties that allow life to exist. You got to understand that, and whether or not
But
other
on this planet, not on other planets.
well, that's the question. Can other sort of unique molecules have their own sort of form of life out of them, or did carbon form somewhere else and just do the same thing, just create a different kind of a trajectory of life? We don't know.
I'm open to it.
Hey, Duncan, what about what was the guy that was picked up in Las Vegas and taken in by the CIA to look at this special spacecraft? Bob, what's his name? Bob something?
Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar. Now, there's a documentary on Netflix about Bob Lazar. Paulina, you know about Bob Lazar?
Nope.
Okay, Bob Lazar was a physicist, short strokes, very short, picked up by the government and swept into this Area 51, right? Isn't that where he went?
I think so, yeah.
And he saw a spacecraft, and the spacecraft had these 4 or 5 units that were these cesium molecules that don't exist on this planet, and they created their own gravitational field, so this aircraft could move on its own all over the place, and he saw it fly. My question about Bob Lazar, I believe everything he says. Here's the problem.
Me too.
Okay, here's the problem.
Me three.
Okay, here's the problem. He was put in a room with some other guy named Larry, right? Am I getting the name right? Wasn't it Larry? And Larry,
I don't remember.
I think it's Larry. So Larry and Bob were the guys who were given the most important observation in the history of physics. Like, we're going to hand over the most important thing that's ever been observed by humanity to Bob. We're not going to bring in Princeton physicists and Caltech physicists. We're going to give it to Bob and Larry. I think the whole thing was one of the government's psychology experiments that they used to do on people all the time. And in this case, they wanted to see how foreign governments would look at deconstructing technologies like our own. And they just observed Bob and Larry and sort of challenged them with all these crazy things and saw how their brains work as a way of hiding technologies of our own.
So wait, you think it was like an MK Ultra experiment or
Not
something?
MK Ultra. MK Ultra is what you were talking about. That all went down at the Kentucky environment you were just talking about with the LSD and stuff. No, I think it was just the military doing experiments on humans the way they used to do it. They just used to do that.
They used to. I love that people think they used to.
Well, what's happening? What's happening now?
What's different
Who knows?
now?
Oh no.
Yeah.
You guys, there are laws and standards and
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that they're following those
Please.
laws.
You're right. I mean, they may do it in other countries or something, but I don't think they.
That's right. They must. I mean, it's such a vast network. There's a lot of it is so mysterious and so deeply classified. Who knows? Who knows what's going on?
Now you're standing like a paranoid person, Duncan. Careful.
I mean, how
What
are
do
we
you
not
mean?
all
What? Why
paranoid
would you say
people?
that? Are you trying to kill me?
Go ahead, Pauline. What were you saying?
I forgot. But ultimately, I don't know. Yeah.
Old people, I thought.
No.
Good. I'm so happy.
At the ripe age of 27, I feel like an old person.
Not. Maybe it's the hallucinogens you did. I'm just concerned. So
You're in trouble.
She's an adult.
Dr. Drew, is this a trick to get Paulina to fess up that she's been taking psychedelics all the
I
time?
feel trapped.
By the way, it worked. Number one, and number two, am I less of a friend to you because of what you're experiencing? Right?
Well,
What do you mean?
I think
Do I judge you? Am I less of a friend of yours?
No, I don't think so. I respect your POV. You're a doctor. You can't tell people to go galloping off into the fields and take their clothes off and coat themselves with pagan honey and have wonderful mushroom orgies and powerful orgasms and
Don't
connect
forget
with the
about the
moon
glitter.
and gain their soul and glitter bomb the world with joy. You're a doctor. You can't do that. We get to do that. We get to say,
I like
maybe
the way
try
I
that.
can't create happiness. Thank you, Duncan.
You can create happiness. You just can't prescribe mushroom orgies yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet. All right, you guys have both overwhelmed me. I don't know where to go from here.
Read some of the comments. Do you have your Restream up?
I am looking at them, and a lot of them like my theory about Ed Lazar. Was that his name? Ed Lazar? Yeah.
That was Bob Lazar.
Bob Lazar, yes. I beg your pardon. Yes, reverse engineering of flying saucers is what they were sort of asked to do. And to me, that's like, and they never really did it. And there was a lot of missing information that I didn't make sort of a sense from a physics standpoint, even though it was an interesting story. And I thought they're just probably deconstructing technology, and they just want to see how humans do that. And that because that's all classified, that's why we don't ever hear what was actually happening to it. All right, anyway.
Well, I mean, Rogan had him on the show.
Yeah,
I talked to Joe, and he said the guy is like completely on the level. One of the things he said he kept saying is, "I'm not making any." He doesn't do paid appearances or something. He's clearly not profiting from the notoriety he's gotten from exposing whatever the hell this thing was. And now that we're seeing these new crafts that are appearing, that seem to be defying or at least operating according to an understanding of physics that isn't our understanding of physics, it makes me think maybe he did see something. Maybe they figured out how to reverse engineer it. Maybe it wasn't an alien craft. It was just some cutting edge technology that they wanted to show. I don't know.
Agreed. Let's get some calls in here. This is Chad. Hey, oh my goodness. Hey, Chad, go ahead. Chad?
Hey, what's up, Dr. Drew? Thanks for having me on, man.
You bet.
So I'm a veteran as well, which I just listened to Ethan, but
Thank you.
I've been active. I've been an active addict for probably 17 years now.
What drug?
Excuse me?
What substance is it?
Mainly opiates. But, once you get to a certain point, and it's pretty much whatever will get you high to check out and become numb, really.
Right. So I'm guessing we're talking about heroin, meth. Is that the combo we're into?
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
It seems to be more of that these days than anything else.
Right. Yeah. That's what it sounds like. Okay. Heroin, meth. Got it.
But I've also been through substance abuse treatment 9 times through a VA hospital with no success. I think the longest period of sobriety that I've had or I don't even call it sobriety, clean time, would be maybe 20 days, 25 days.
What's the longest period of time? Hang on. What's the longest period of time you stayed in a structured environment, like a halfway house, that kind of thing?
Well, I had to do what they call the Alpha program when I was incarcerated, and that was a 4-month therapeutic community where you had to, have affirmations daily. You had structured routine daily.
How'd you do?
Which was also an incarcerated environment.
I understand you were mandated to it, but how'd you do there?
Actually, really good. I came out very positive, had a good outlook.
Right. So hold on.
And within 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm sure. And so were you on Suboxone at that time, or have you been on sustained Suboxone or something like that?
I had before in the past, but being incarcerated, there is no maintenance medication, no nothing like that. It's complete.
Okay. So here's
abstinence.
Here's the bottom line on. First of all, thank you for your service, number one. Number two, I would look at this as you've only been treated 9 times. Bob Forrest, who I work with all the time, needed 24 treatments, and he feels like every single one of those was an important process in getting him to ultimate sobriety. But with your story, there are 2 big things that need to be done. And I'm sorry, you may not like this. One is, I think replacement therapy for you is a real option. So something like low dose of Suboxone would be a good idea. Number 2, 4 months isn't long enough. Opiate addiction, it's often 1 to 2 years of structured living for people really to kind of get it. So you've done good for periods of time. I would look all this as part of the process. You've been successful, you've tried things, you know what works. Now let's take it all the way. Let's get into an environment that you can stay in for a year. Let's get on some low-dose replacement therapy of some type. And I'm imagining PTSD and other traumas are figuring in there. And once you've been stabilized, that kind of thing can also get treated. All right, man. Thanks so much. Duncan, any comments?
No, I mean, what a nightmare it is to get hooked on opiates. My God, I always think about that.
It is.
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Today, the meth combo it's almost ubiquitous. People are using meth with the heroin, and the meth is what makes things almost untreatable. It's such a horrible drug, and it's just
speedballs.
Well, speedballs traditionally were cocaine and heroin. Now they're speed and heroin, and it's just the worst combination. It makes people extraordinarily difficult to treat.
I did meth once.
Yeah, congratulations.
It was horrible. It was the worst. It was off. I mean, for a second, I felt like I was a divine being, but then the crash from it was the way. This is what happened. I did it. It was so dumb. Like meth, and I don't even know why. I should never have done it, but I wanted to see what it was like. You know, everyone's talking about it, but I ended up walking out of my friend's place at 10 a.m. feeling like I'd had the best night's sleep, like completely rested. I hadn't slept at all. Took a cab home, got home, cleaned my house, got all this, got stuff done. And then I can't even explain the crash. I've done so many psychedelics. I have never experienced a crash like that.
Right.
The deepest, instantaneous depression. Yeah. It felt like someone had taken a saw blade to my brain. I couldn't think, and it lasted days. It was horrible.
And guess what, Duncan? If you're an addict, what are you going to do? You're going to run for another hit.
Right.
And if you do that over even a few weeks, it affects your thinking. The paranoia start to develop. You become more resistant to treatment and guidelines. It makes things, and the ultimate, if you do it long enough, which sometimes isn't that long, you get severe paranoid preoccupations and bizarre delusions with the focus on people close to you. Family, friends, neighbors, coworkers.
It's so difficult.
No kidding.
Hey, Dad.
Yeah.
I've never done meth.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's good. It's a relief. One you haven't done.
That's not true. I've done meth with Paulina. She's the one who gave it to me, Dr. Drew. I didn't want to either. She bullied me. See, she's bad. She bullied me into it.
Well, some part of you is evil, Duncan. I know that about you.
Well, some part of all of us is evil, isn't it?
I guess that's true. I guess that's true. All right, man. I'm going to let you go. I wish we had. Caleb, I should have thought of this. We don't. I want to play at least part of his Tesla appearance on Drunk History. Do we have any way of doing that? Probably not.
We can't do that.
Is there a link? I want to watch it later.
Yeah, there's a link on drdrew.com.
We'll put a link up to Tesla particularly, and maybe also the dolphin one that you and I did.
Cool.
And then here's the deal, my friend. Next time you are not allowed to do Drunk History without me being there, or at least being.
Deal.
Next time I want to be an actor in one of your episodes.
Yes, that would be awesome. I would like for us to be actors in somebody else's story. That would be cool.
Yes.
Paulina, what a joy to meet you. It's really nice to meet you. You're amazing. Thanks for having me on your show, Dr. Drew. It's always a blast to get to hang out with you. Let's get dinner again sometime.
Yeah, all right, dinner. You, me, and Pete Holmes again. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Can I come?
That was fun.
Yes, please come.
Okay.
And we'll do your show. You email me. We'll set up a time.
Okay, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay.
Thanks a lot, y'all.
Lovely to meet you.
Love you, Duncan.
We love
you back. Thanks, y'all. Love you guys.
So, Mr. Producer, why don't we break a little early here? Yes, we'll come back and take some calls.
Yes, we have a doctor on the
psychiatrist.
line.
Oh, is she on the line already?
Yes.
Okay, good.
She's actually waiting and ready to go.
Great. So let's break now. I do want to get to some of your calls, and by the way, those of you that are on hold,
call in.
Well, I do plan. We are, as I said, going to have a bonus episode at the end here where I'm just going to do calls.
984-2 Dr. Drew.
Yeah, and let's take a little break. We'll need a little breather. Be right back.
Ask me questions.
Right back. Be right back. The CBD industry is still pretty much the Wild West when it comes to claims and criticisms. The science is catching up with the industry. We will have clinical science soon enough, and there seems to be an overwhelmingly positive response these days to CBD's efficacy. We've all heard the reports, and luckily our good friends at Social CBD are raising the industry testing standards. They like to say they are test obsessed. Social CBD works closely with their suppliers and multiple third-party labs to ensure you are getting exactly the package that they say you are getting. High-quality CBD with 0.0 THC. And Social CBD wants you to be skeptical. That's why they put a QR and batch code on every package. This allows you to check all the test results for your product, not general testing, the product, the specific batch you bought. And while Social CBD broad spectrum products are available in a range of formulations, each of which is clearly described so you can make an informed decision without all that hype and promises that sound too good to be true. To learn more, go to drdrew.com/socialcbd. That is my website, drdrew.com/SOCIALCBD. For a limited time, you can save 20% at checkout with the code Dr. Drew. Now let's get back to the show. Needles have increasingly become a part of everyday life. Proper disposal is both difficult and expensive. We have the solution. Simpler, safer, affordable, and fulfills the obligation to protect our environment. A single stick with something like this means tracking down the user. It means blood test for the person stuck. It means possibly medication for an extended period of time. Needle sticks are devastating. No more. Incinerate the needle. Needle goes in this port. It's over. Done. Needle gone. We all have loved ones who use needles. Keep their home safe. Medical offices are loaded with sharps. We are using ancient technology to protect our patients, our staff, ourselves. You know what needle sticks do. You know the cost and the devastation psychologically and physically, potentially, from a needle stick. Eliminate that completely. Stop using ancient technology. Sand MIDI. It will solve your problems. Find out more at needledestructiondevice.com.
In your professional opinion, what do you think of these gas station dick pills?
At best, a waste of time. At worst, dangerous.
What is the worst thing that could happen for them?
Worst case, you could wind up dead.
Do you ever say, hey, I'm gonna do something like this. I'm gonna try this.
Nikki Glaser needs to get her show back. That's all I'm saying. I miss it. Let me get on the phone now a psychiatrist, Dr. Gita, I think Vaid. I hope I'm pronouncing your name properly. Website is theketaminetrainingcenter.com. Is it Dr. Vaid? Is that correct?
Almost, Dr. Vaid.
Vaid, I beg your pardon. So it looks like I was putting some weird non-English sort of interpretation, but I apologize. Dr. Vaid, so let's start with, you heard some of the conversation we were getting into regarding the risks and benefits of hallucinogenics, and it is sort of the wild, wild west. Let's start with ketamine, since that's the one for which there is a lot of objective data and a lot of good clinical experience.
Yes, thank you very much for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here. I work with ketamine a lot. I am a psychiatrist in private practice in New York City. I'm also a psychoanalyst, so I do a lot of psychotherapy. But I'm very involved with ketamine as part of the Ketamine Training Center, which is really a center to teach physicians how to really administer ketamine for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So I do a lot of ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. So in that way, you have the flexibility to use it as a medication where there's a lot of data and a lot of wonderful results for treatment-resistant depression and anxiety, but also to really shift how we're practicing psychotherapy. And it is the one psychedelic that is FDA approved and available, and a very interesting, good one.
I think of it more as a dissociative anesthetic than a psychedelic. Am I wrong in doing so?
No, I think you're right. That's how it's classified, and it's been used as an anesthetic for a really long period of time, but it does have psychedelic properties. And so even though it acts on different receptor systems, it does have psychedelic experience. And a lot of us believe that the deeper access to aspects of self and being, as well as the psychedelic experience itself, can have therapeutic value when used in the right context. You know, the second setting is critical.
Now
I love what Paulina said about intention. That was very thoughtful.
Say it again if people didn't hear it. That the intentionality.
I said I really appreciated the intention.
No. I mean Paulina's statement, because we have people kind of coming in and out of the show here.
Set and setting is absolutely necessary, but having an intention before interacting with any drug is important because it allows you to be purposeful about what you're doing. In addition, something I was thinking about, it's really important if you're on medications to research.
How about ask your psychiatrist?
Well, ask your psychiatrist first. Usually psychiatrists will say no.
Well,
and then you can
ketamine
research
is a very
it.
interesting. I think actually ketamine, one of the nice things is it has very few interactions with medicines. And when psychiatrists say no, generally it's because a lot of the medicines can block or inhibit the effects of psychedelics, most psychedelics. But I think you're right. They should be responsible. Is to be, responsible with the way in which you're using it. And a lot of what you mentioned in terms of your stability and thoughtfulness going into a process is so important and so wise.
So Dr. Vaid, you're sort of the ketamine story is pretty well worked out. It works for depression. It just does. There's various different ways of doing it, but you're advocating using a throwback to something that was being researched back in the 60s, which was psychedelic assisted psychotherapy, right? And I think that's what you're aiming towards. Is that accurate?
That's right. I'm also a MAPS therapist, so I'm very involved with MAPS, which do psychedelic psychotherapy with MDMA for PTSD. So it's really amazing for trauma. It's also amazing for the kind of trauma that brings people into my office for deeper work. And the reason I'm such an advocate is not only because it's a novel antidepressant. Actually, a lot of psychedelics are novel antidepressants with very few side effects. Yeah. But more than that, I think the magic in them, from my point of view, or the huge advantage, is that it can really lead to deeper healing and really foundational correction, which is an extraordinary process to really, I think it's just a huge game changer in healing and psychiatry, potentially.
Give people a little primer on what MAPS is, in case people don't know.
Yes, definitely. MAPS is an incredible organization, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and they've really been the leader in really promoting psychedelics for healing, and a lot of the studies which are leading to hopefully FDA approval of MDMA for assisted psychotherapy. They're also doing some other studies as well, looking at relationships for veterans and even conflict resolution in the Middle East. They're a very extraordinary organization.
Yeah, I worry about clinicians going beyond the clinical, like into sort of social engineering that has always gone bad. So it worries me when clinicians want to do that. But
understood.
Yeah, but I want to drill in a little more. I think we're really talking about the psychotherapeutic treatment of trauma ultimately, right? Isn't that really where the main focus is here?
Absolutely. I think that pretty much captures the essence of this.
Yeah.
And also the way we think about in psychiatry about illness and disease and symptom relief and managing symptoms, I think it really opens up a different way of thinking about how do we think of trauma, how do we think of healing, how are we diagnosing people, and what's going off with our alignments and our internal connections and external connections.
Give me those thoughts. How do you give a little primer on that? How were you thinking about it differently now than, say, when you were training in psychoanalysis?
Well, one of the main things that I see that is so amazing is how much I'm very interested in character and personalities. And I think that that's really the foundations of psychoanalysis and defenses, and how much of our energies are placed towards protecting ourselves in characteristic ways that define us, that really result in us being the characters that we are. And we're all trying to use the best of ourselves to really cope with life and manage. And then invariably, there's a cost to that. We get stuck in these prisons of our character. And psychedelics really allow us to open that up and access different ways of coping, different ways which are more flexible, more in sync with who we are right now, different upgrades of who we are, our sense of identity and self, which is formed in childhood, perhaps with not the ideal resources. I mean, I really think it takes a village to raise someone. We don't have that village. And so it's really quite extraordinary. I do think that, psychedelics are extraordinary. I think of the therapeutic relationship being as important oftentimes to this work as the medicine itself, to do some of that deeper work, or if not, at least deep thoughtfulness and preparedness entering into an experience to really access the full potential.
I totally get it, because as you and I know, that resistance is one of the big problems that we run into, and it seems like these are therapeutic tools to help diminish resistance or gain access, open up, all those same kinds of words. But let me throw a little challenge out that where I worry about all this, which is that I'm certain you as a psychiatrist, I as somebody working in a psychiatric hospital for many years, saw lots of adverse consequences from hallucinogen use. Now again,
like what?
Mood disturbances, personality changes, cognitive changes, and as I told you, in the severe cases where they couldn't even take care of themselves anymore. But that who knows how much they were using and what context and what they were using and all this stuff. So there's some potential downside. When you start talking about changing the personality, we're really talking about changing the brain. Don't you worry that there might be some process unleashed that we don't fully understand there?
Well, I think that I don't think psychedelics are for everyone. So I certainly am not an advocate of everyone will get better with psychedelics. So I really think there has to be careful selection of the person. I do see people all the time who really want to try them, and I just feel they don't have the strengths or the capacities at this moment. So I think some of it depends on who are the subjects. You have to have appropriate, perhaps, pieces in place to really benefit.
And not to be fair, it's got to be people that maybe have failed other modalities, and the risks are worth the benefits, or the benefits are worth the risk, right? I mean, you will take some more risk with somebody that has recalcitrant.
No, I wouldn't even go that far. Actually, I wouldn't say that for ketamine-assisted psychotherapy. I don't think it has to be
ketamine. I'm not thinking about ketamine, because ketamine we understand. You know what I mean? We've got the data. I'm thinking of the things where we don't have the data yet. Even though we have lots of anecdotes, we don't have the data.
I mean, I think the anecdotal evidence on the internet is the basis for research at this moment. I think that there is a benefit to having the internet and having people record.
But it's all anecdote.
I mean, it's not scientific.
No.
We are getting a lot of the safety studies under our belt, which I think are very important. I mean, it's interesting with psychedelics because we do have a lot of history and knowledge from previous studies which weren't adequate and are being repeated. And we do have, so it is one of those interim periods where we are getting some of the safety data, which will be very important and very necessary. So I do think that's an important piece. But to your point, Drew, I do really support what you're saying. I think that psychedelics need to be carefully evaluated, individuals, because I have seen disasters and difficult outcomes with even SSRIs when I've given people antidepressants. So it's not true that psychedelics, though they're safe, will not cause those. I think I see all the time people who have been in ayahuasca circles who have invited a psychosis. And I would say I'm a big advocate of psychedelics for healings and psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, but that doesn't mean to say you can't have disastrous consequences when used in the wrong context, in the wrong situations, and also sometimes unexpectedly difficulties arise and they have to be managed.
So let me frame it this way, which is that there's no medication that doctors recommend that is not potentially dangerous. All medications are dangerous. They're extra physiological, whether it's your hypertension med or your antidepressant, whatever, these are all dangerous chemicals. That's why we're so careful in how we try to be careful in how we administer them, and we try to have a ton of science to back us up so we can understand the risk-benefit ratios every time we do it. And I'm used to a lot of that in general medicine, and so when I don't have that, I start to get very worried. It might be the greatest treatments ever conceived for humanity, but until the data's there, I get very worried. Let me bring in somebody, a friend, and somebody everyone I think knows. Jane's Addiction. He's also from the show Ink Master, none other than Dave Navarro. Dave, you there?
Hey, Drew, how are you?
Hey, buddy, good to hear from you. You hear this conversation?
Very good to hear from you. Yes, I have, and I got to chime in, and I actually say that based on my own experiences in terms of working with psychedelics on my own, and working in terms of sitting with people in space that were working on their own issues, I've seen it go both ways too. And I think the element that we're missing here is the integration post-journey, because the journey themselves can open somebody who's very traumatized, who's got a lot of deep, locked up, stuffed away darkness. An unexplained journey is going to be even more traumatic for them. and they're even more susceptible to them given the circumstances.
So
and I think a lot of the misconception.
Yeah.
I'm sorry?
So it'd be re-traumatizing
Well,
rather than healing. Yeah.
It has potentially,
I get it.
without some kind of somebody in place to help with the integration into their practical lives moving forward. So, for instance, some of the journeys that I've gone on they didn't reveal their gifts until 6 months down the line.
Wow.
It's not a cure-all. What I'm saying is journey work has worked for me, and I am a proponent and advocate for it myself. However, I believe that it requires care, it requires a setting and safety, and even a clinician, perhaps a therapist, a trusted circle of people.
Yeah.
And for me, that way the safety is there, the likelihood of a traumatic event is lessened because you've got safety in a circle of people you trust. And then moving forward, having taken notes, having treated this as a clinical journey and documenting what comes up during the journey, and then processing that in therapeutic cognitive therapy moving forward, we can then see the meanings and the gifts and the journeys. And I have a lot of friends that make the mistake of going to a friend's house at 2 a.m. for an ayahuasca circle, thinking it's going to fix all their problems.
Right.
And that's when I think and that's when I think we run into trouble, and I think the doctor might agree with that.
I think she will. Before I go back to her, though, 2 things from you. Tell them about your radio show and your documentary.
Documentary?
Well, the documentary is called Morning Sun, and it's actually spelled MOURNINGSON, and it's about the tragic murder of my mother and my journey through that. And it's available on Amazon and every streaming platform. And then as far as the radio show, Dr. Drew, I got to tell you, I've taken considerable steps to eliminate my visibility on the internet. So the radio show is done, Facebook is done, Twitter is done, blogs are done. I'm done. I'm done with the internet. So if you want to see pictures of my if you want to see pictures of my life, go on Instagram, and that's about it.
Right.
But so I've taken a big step back in terms of what's going on today in terms of digital culture.
Good for
I don't
you.
want to be,
That's awesome.
It's almost like they are trying to crank out these digitally addicted, pharmaceutically addicted little creatures, and I don't want to be one of them. So there you go.
And let's go back, Dr. Vaid.
Vaid.
I beg your pardon. Vaid. You heard what David said. I'm interested in your comments.
Yes.
I'm sure you agree.
I really like what he says, actually. I thought it was very well said. The integration part, and that's the psychotherapy part, and safety is the other thing he emphasized, which I think is so important, not only in terms of evaluation and risk, but also when you know the person who's supporting you and has a way of actually trying to understand and make meaning of the process with you. And sometimes it is a process, but it really shifts things when I've been working with individuals who have maps and a preparedness of knowing who they are, knowing what's impacted them, having a context, having a therapeutic alliance to, in that setting, to go into an experience can be quite an extraordinary healing process.
Dave,
and a corrective
Dave or Dr. Vaid?
Of everyone.
Yeah.
What are sort of testing?
Wait, Dave first.
Okay,
Dave first, then your question. Dave, go ahead. Yeah, then I'm going to let you go,
I
Dave.
just want to add.
Go ahead.
Yeah, because I think we're all on the same team, and this is so new and this is so experimental that's why I feel so many precautions need to be in place. Because if what we're talking about is opening up new neural pathways, so I agree that is taking place, and that there are studies that show that with psilocybin and guys like Terence McKenna that you may think are crazy or not, I think that there is some legitimacy to some of his theories. But in any event, if you're opening up new neural pathways, there has to be a way to implement using those new neural pathways in your day-to-day life. So, for instance, I used to spin out on a negative pathway. Every outcome was going to be negative. And after a lot of journey work, my pathways opened up and, there's a positive outcome here, and I could choose the pathway I go. But it took deep integration to learn how to access those pathways and make that choice. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about these journeys, and I think that, and I have, this is irresponsible for me to say, but I have seen people come out of journeys and they're transformed. Period. End of story. No integration necessary. And I've also seen a lot of people who are deeply severely traumatized come out and need lots of integration, and myself being one of them.
Yeah, and those ones that are magically changed, I worry about that. It's like, well, what changed? We're talking about brain change, and what, have we?
Yeah.
Is there untoward change in there somewhere that we just don't detect? I mean, it looks good on the surface, but what have we done to that person's brain? That's all the stuff I worry about as an internist.
We don't know, and you're right. And in terms of long term, I don't know. And there's one of those kinds of thought process that goes into the overall universal context of this is, hey man, if they end up a little crazy and a lot happy, what's to stop them? You know what I mean?
I
stop
get
somebody's
it.
happiness?
But I get that, but you should know that the literature back in the 60s, when they were researching this stuff, they'd go, well, they seem like a little more upbeat and caring and empathic people now, so whatever's happened and we like it. It's like, yeah, but you changed the person. And that's, and Dr. Vaid?
What I would say is, what I've understood from the process in working with trauma is, it's not as if you see transformations of a person shifting like a Jekyll and Hyde story. It really is much subtler than that, although the subtlety can be quite profound. What you really see, which can be quite extraordinary, is how much energy is put in one's character towards protection and really survival. And when you see that force, when someone feels safe, to actually be transformed towards not being so focused on their protective self, they wind up actually transforming to being able to look beyond themselves into their brother or their cousins or their neighbor. Right. And it usually is a transformation where the person will say, this is who I am, generally speaking, when I feel safe. And it's been 10 years since I've been in this mindset or place. It's more who I am, not less who I am. It's that kind of transformation. It's not transforming into being another person, because I do think our natural human condition, when we feel safe, is to be able to not be so me, which I think is just an expression of trying to take care of ourselves and feel better. The feel better might get lost in, I need more. Maybe I'm just feeling empty and hungry because I don't have enough. Perhaps I need a second home. Perhaps I need a different wife. Whatever that might look like societally based. It doesn't work, of course, but I think when people feel safe, they generally feel so grateful.
Dave?
They look to someone else.
If I can chime in, and what I think she's speaking to, and what I've seen is that, and it's been proven, and I believe this for a fact, that trauma physically lives in the body. Yep. It physically lives as adrenaline. It physically lives, it's held within our musculature, within our spiritual character. Yep. And people walk around miserable with their lives seemingly perfect because they're holding on to old trauma. And I think that sometimes some of these journeys can help access that trauma and lift it and help someone to drop it. And I have seen that happen and seen the weight lifted from them. In other cases, I've seen people be lifted of that very trauma 6 months, a year down the line, sometimes with multiple sessions. I heard you talk about ketamine, which is a whole different thing about treating depression versus opening something up to a new awareness. I think there's a more of a spiritual journey with the psilocybin, with the MDMA, with the ayahuasca for sure. That's just been my experience, but it's different for everybody. But I just want to say that to be responsible about this, I'm not speaking about someone who has worked with psychedelics solely. I'm also someone who spent years in therapy, years in programs, years in trying different alternative ways. So then when I got to the point of a journey, I had the dialogue, I had the language, I was able to express myself in terms that made sense on a clinical and a psychological level, and express myself clearly because I had years and years of working on myself prior to diving into this.
I relate to that a lot. I think by the time that I experienced psilocybin, I had been in therapy for 6 years. And so all of the work that I had done in therapy was sort of extended into my journey. Dr. Vaid and Mr. Navarro, while you were speaking, I was thinking about how to describe the phenomena. Rather than changing the personality, I think it's more of a change of disposition. Would that be fair to say?
Hopefully.
I would think
see people say,
in my case, it allowed me the option to change my disposition. You're not gonna give me I'm not gonna have a journey and wake up a different person. That's I am an empathic person. I'm a sensitive person by nature. But what used to be what's called looping, which is when the brain gets in a traumatic loop and it's only going down one neural pathway and it can only see one negative outcome. When you open up other neural pathways, you are now given the option to react differently to life stressors.
Dave, I'm going to let you go, man. I appreciate you spending a little time with us. It's been really cool, and I hope you're well.
Anytime, man. Thank you.
Buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Dr. Vaid, let's talk a little bit, a couple more specific things. Really what we're looking for in trauma therapy is integration. Would you agree that we're trying, it's not, Dave talked about breaking loops, negative loops, anxiety loops, that kind of thing, which those sort of circuits obviously are problematic, but I always think about it more as parts of the brain that are inaccessible to flexible regulation by other parts of the brain. And I'm wondering if we have any theory, if that's true, if you agree with that, A. B, how do we have any idea how these hallucinogenics help with that?
I think that I do think it kind of can. I think there's different ways of thinking about this thing, different things we're seeing and conceptualizing it. I do think it can lead to much better regulation, homeostasis, regulation, even character regulation, emotional regulation. I mean, I've seen people, even on a nervous system level, feel more regulated, more able to breathe. It gets to be quite meditative. It can be dropping out of your thinking mind. And meditation, oftentimes, I really try and introduce mindfulness practices, meditation practices. A lot of people who couldn't meditate before because they were too stuck in loops and thoughts feel that they're able to actually break some of those obsessive thinking patterns and can, for the first time, sit and meditate. But it's really dropping out of your thinking mind more into the sensual wisdom and intelligence that resides in the body, which is not just, we all walk around in our heads and minds. And I just want to say one other thing to follow on the transformation idea or the shifting patterns. I think that, it's such a scary idea. Even when I hear you talk about characters change, that sounds really unpleasant. And that's not what I see in my office. It is much more a sense of really, what I hear all the time is people feeling, wow, I feel more like myself. Or the process of transformation is more almost like a blossoming into the fullness of one's potential, as opposed to being stuck in developmentally immature patterns of behavior or resorting to very early young primitive defenses that we all employ under fear and stress, or metabolizing trauma that's held in our body or minds that really blocks us, these trauma loops and these kind of patterns that we live in that we can't get out of and keep repeating.
Do you have a theory about what's going on biologically?
What do I think is going on? Well, there's a lot of incredible studies looking at the default mode networks, in our brains, where you really, how much of our identities, sense of selves, and characters are really held in these circuitry in our minds, which don't get upgraded. So to actually have a chance to really be out of that for several hours in a different space and see the world in different ways, not defined by these loops, is one theory that's on the table, which is quite powerful. I do also think in that space, there's really a potential with the defenses down, really to, in correspondence in the therapy and the human-to-human relationship, have an upgrade in terms of some of those capacities, all of which are born out of early child-parent relationships. I mean, we come into this world really unable to regulate ourselves, leaning on caregivers. So in that space, to actually have a chance to have a redo with a therapist, you can be a really good parent for 45 minutes.
Right. So are you so your school of psychoanalysis is relational psychoanalysis? Is that accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
And would you just give people get so confused about mental health work and what people's training is. Explain to people what a psychiatrist is and what a psychoanalyst is, because they're very different.
They're very different. So I'm a psychiatrist, which means I went to medical school, did 4 years at residency training in psychiatry at NYU Medical Center. I actually did 2 years of research subsequent to that. And then I did psychoanalytic training, which is a whole different training where you have a couple of years of didactics and then many, many years, way too many, probably 8 years, where I was in analysis myself and also analyzing patients myself with supervision and lectures. So that's kind of an interminable process, kind of like analysis is actually.
Yeah,
but it really gives you a deeper sense of
right. It's developing the caretaker, the doctor, as an instrument. You have to be developed as an instrument of the psychoanalytic process.
An instrument.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for saying that. It really is making you really able to use yourself in a different way in therapy to be an instrument, which I think if you can combine those capacities with this deeper access you have in the deeper field, it can be a winning combination. But I love the caution and the care you're bringing, because I do worry about some of the excitement, even though I'm very excited about it, of it really leading to, misuse and inappropriate use and a lot of casualties, which I think we saw happen in the 60s, which I think led to the whole movement being closed down, when there was at the same time wonderful research happening, showing all sorts of exciting promises. And I worry for the same thing happening again out of excitement and enthusiasm.
Right, and a lot of people are sort of doing it on their own or doing it on the DL. And
that's what I keep thinking about. I keep thinking about, the 17-year-old who's in his mom's basement doing psychedelics.
I'm not even talking about that. That's not good. I'm talking about people that are doing it with so-called therapists, or maybe good therapists, or I don't know good therapists, because I don't know what's required. There's no guidelines yet, and so it's just worrisome. That's all. And lots of good results. Lots of good results being anecdotally reported. Will they sustain? Will they go for 5 years, 10 years, for the rest of we just don't have that.
I guess I worry about privilege. I mean, obviously we want to privilege a space in which there's guidance and expertise, but most people don't have access to a ketamine center where they can go. I mean, if you're in the middle of nowhere and you hear that ketamine's cool and you're going to try it, what would your advice be for someone who is going to try it, do it?
Now, let's differentiate. Ketamine for depression is for recalcitrant depression that has failed other therapeutic intervention. Dr. Vaid is doing ketamine psychotherapy or psychoanalysis, really.
Psychotherapy.
Yeah.
Ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, which is a different process. I also wanted just to say one thing about David Navarro. He did say something about ketamine, in his experience, not being a very soulful medicine. And I have to say, because I work with it a lot, I think that actually ketamine has gotten a bad reputation because it's an anesthetic. And I think so much of it is dose-related. It can be a very gentle. I'm also a big proponent of the low dose versus the high dose range. Right. So it can be quite subtle. It can be quite anxiolytic. It can be quite meditative and very soulful. So I just think a lot of it depends, once again, on how you use these. Some people take heroic doses, and that's a whole different experience. And then, of course, there's so much lack of knowledge. But I do understand your point, Pauline. It's a very good one. People are reading about this and they really want these medicines. And I think a lot of conversations are happening. There is a lot of states actually that are looking into decriminalization and trying to be responsible of how do we have environments where people can get care and treatment, because there is an underground movement. There's some wonderful underground therapists. There are also some terribly scary underground therapists. And I've met, seen, and see the consequences of both. And it's just really hard as a consumer to really distinguish.
To be fair, as a primary practitioner, I would have trouble knowing, because again, no guidelines. I don't know. How do I know someone's the right? Would you stay with me for a few minutes, and let's take a couple calls about PTSD, which is sort of a trauma-related topic.
Yes.
Do you mind?
Absolutely, thank you.
All right, let's get into it with. This is Michelle, who's asking about EMDR and PTSD. So post-traumatic stress disorder we're talking about. Michelle.
Yes.
Hi, doctor. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet. Go right ahead. You're on. Did we lose you?
Okay. I've been clean and sober for 32 years.
Congratulations.
And thank you. I've been in weekly therapy for 42 years. And I have had repeated victimizations for 60 years.
So hold on. So slow down. So wait. Slow down. Slow down. So in spite of sobriety and treatment, You had adverse childhood experience characterized by a victimization. That's your original trauma. Is that correct?
Yeah, I've had a series of victimizations. The most significant that really took me out. I was in the battered women's shelter and I witnessed a brutal murder.
Okay.
And so that's where I got my PTSD diagnosis.
Okay. I get it. Slow down. And in childhood, what was the big trauma? Big T trauma.
Incest.
Okay. So there's sexual abuse in childhood. There's a huge event in adulthood that triggers essentially a chronic PTSD. This is sort of how PTSD gets set up. And there's what's called, and I'm glad we have a psychoanalyst here there, what Dr. Freud would call, what did he call it? Repetition compulsion, that we now call traumatic reenactments. Dr. Vaid, talk about that a little bit.
Yes. Well, this is exactly what we were alluding to earlier. Nice to meet you, Michelle, and I'm sorry to hear your story. That we do, all of us, as people get stuck in these trauma complexes, that sometimes we kind of almost get stuck. Freud would call it the repetition compulsion. And I do think you have a lot of support. It sounds like you've done incredible work, but it's very difficult to really escape from some of these patterns. And I do think that EMDR, which is a whole different process, can really be quite helpful in that, in concert with psychotherapy. And this is exactly the picture where someone like yourself would benefit potentially from the work that we're doing in the study with severe PTSD, with psychotherapy assisted with MDMA, where one really has a chance to almost metabolize the trauma in the safety of a relationship, and sometimes really let go of some of these really, really difficult patterns that are so ingrained, that are very painful to be part of. And so this is, I think, really where psychedelics can be a whole new approach, which is quite extraordinary.
So EMDR, yes, Michelle, if you have access to that. Okay.
Thank you.
It's definitely worth trying.
Thank you, doctor.
And even ketamine-assisted psychotherapy, I would say, with the right therapist, you really can do some trauma work with ketamine, but it really is in the context of a really safe relationship. This is where the therapy piece is critical.
Right. And so, do you want referrals? I mean, should we put your stuff up on my website if people can come?
Thank you. That's very kind. The Ketamine Training Center actually has a link to physicians that we've trained over throughout the U.S.
Okay, so the ketaminetrainingcenter.com?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. And you used an interesting phrase. You talked about metabolizing trauma. I heard about metabolizing trauma. I probably was Peter Fonagy talking about this. And he always talked in terms of the psychoanalyst receiving the trauma and giving it back in a metabolized form. Is that what you mean? Or is it literally you're doing something to the brain with the psychedelics?
Well, it's really interesting because some of these processes that Peter Fonagy and analysts have thought about for years, or even the function of the mother in infant-child development, it really opens up the process to happen in a very interesting way in the context of the long psychedelic psychotherapy session, be it with ketamine or be it with MDMA. And it probably is a mixture of both. I think in the safety, sometimes it is the affects, the states are tolerated by the therapist and then able to be taken back in. But I think that's one thread. The other thread is the person, oftentimes in the safety. I've seen this with veterans. In the safety where they are actually have the amygdala turned off, they can actually review what happened in the battlefield or what happened in their childhood. So it's almost sharing the experience, going through it in great detail.
So it's almost like that's sort of the way we treat phobias, right? Is being able to get into them and tolerate it without anxiety.
Exposure therapy.
A kind of exposure therapy, but exposure
it's really
without.
Like a re-experiencing. It's like a re-experiencing, and it really feels as if you're, as a therapist, sometimes it can be quite actually overly intense to go through the experience, and also a privilege to play that role. But it's kind of extraordinary because you feel like they have a chance of really being able to process, go through it, let go of it. And that is really quite a different process than an analytic process even.
Right.
It's almost an extension.
So right. So there's a lot packed into what she just said there, right?
Yeah.
And that is an example of her using herself and body and brain as an instrument to receive the trauma and experience it with the patient, which is the part we were kind of talking about there, and then offering it back in a metabolized form, which again is the process of analysis in a weird way. But go ahead.
But I guess, I mean, obviously that is the ideal condition, right? You have someone who can help you through your traumatic events. But I immediately jump to people who do not have access to that.
I understand. We'll talk about that in a second. But that's part of the problem with getting people into trauma therapy. They resist coming in because they don't want to revivify the trauma, and it's hard to convince them that that's not going to be a re-traumatizing process.
And it can be. It oftentimes can be very traumatizing to even. I've had patients come to see me who don't want to talk about their trauma because they'll get worse.
But I would argue, right. But I would argue that in skilled hands, you won't let that happen.
Absolutely, that's correct. And also the right conditions, right.
Right. So what do we do about the lack of access to mental health care in America, which is what you keep alluding to?
Overarching problem.
And it's a massive issue. And by the way, we have a shortage of psychiatrists, we have a shortage of psychiatric beds, we have shortage of resources, we have an IMD exclusion for the chronically mentally ill, we have almost nobody trained like Dr. Vaid. I'm jealous of your training. It's rare to find, what you know what I'm talking about, the combo of treatments of training that you've had. What do we do? Paulina won't let us go.
It's not even just that. It's more of the, I'm thinking of like the 15-year-old in Wisconsin who has, it's meth or ketamine, it's either or.
The fact is there are armies of people out there. There really are. But I'll let Dr. Vaid see what her opinion is on this.
Well, I think we're going to have to come up with a hybrid solution, obviously. We are going to have to do something to make care available. But I would say, if I'm going to go back to psychedelics particularly, and this is, if you bear with me, because this doesn't really answer the access to care, although I would say the Ketamine Training Center, where we actually have a foundation to try and offer access to care for lower fee care. So we are trying to make an effort to try and address.
There's a lot of that out there. There's a lot of, if you do your work, there's a lot of stuff out there. But anyway, I understand what you're saying.
But you're right. Right now, it starts off with this is a very new treatment. It's a very expensive treatment, and it's not really affordable for most individuals. And of course, paradoxically, people with trauma can't work. So they're even going to be people who need it more. So all of that is true. My concern, though, is what I hear a lot with psychedelics is we need to scale it, we need to dispense it, and that becomes the pressing number one issue. And I think that need is there, and that thinking is correct. The problem is we haven't worked out what is the best way to deliver it. How can we do it in the most conscientious way, which is probably going to be the most detailed, expensive, cost inefficient in every single way. And I still feel to sort it out, even if it makes it the most complex sessions, my sessions are 3 to 4 hour long. That's not very affordable. That's not very safe. I'm probably the only ketamine therapist who loses money on ketamine sessions as opposed to making money. But you can see how the thoughtfulness, the care, it's such beautiful work. And once we understand how to do it, that's when I think you can see where can we cut it out? Where can we actually then find what are the most important pieces? Where can we then find different ways of packaging it to make it more affordable? But if you skip that step, I think you wind up actually sometimes missing out on the most important ingredients and perhaps shifting it to being a really good antidepressant, which I have to say psychedelics are really good antidepressants, and I have no problem using them that for purpose.
We think.
But, a lot of them, like ketamine, I think we can say confidently is.
Yes,
and the data is very promising with the others. And my pet peeve is when people are doing ketamine-assisted or psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy, and they imagine they're doing the psychotherapy, and they tell themselves that, but they're not even aware that in fact it's much more of the biological antidepressant effect, which I think is fine as long as you know what you're doing and the pieces have been sorted out. When there's a confusion, that's what I find really actually that's my pet peeve. I feel let's know what we're doing. Let's offer several different treatments, and let's get better at then changing policies and coverage. And because this really shifts the way in which mental health is delivered and even diagnosed potentially.
I have a caller from Japan who wants to ask about psychedelic and PTSD and cannabis too, apparently. So, Scott, go ahead there.
Dr. Drew, thank you for taking my call. I've been listening to a lot, and I've been learning a lot too with your talk with the psychiatrist, Dr. Vaid.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
And Yeah, very, very interesting stuff. First of all, I want to say that EMDR is a great thing. I've done EMDR, and it's a little scary at first. It draws out a lot of bad memories, but in the long run, it's worked well for me.
It can be intense. It can be very intense.
It is, but I highly recommend it. I live in Japan, so it's kind of hard for me to get access to this stuff, and I'm actually an Army veteran. I've done one tour in Iraq, and I suffer from PTSD. Marijuana has worked for me a lot, but I am interested in some of the other stuff. I used to be a pretty heavy drinker, and I used to kind of, push back the demons, I guess. And I've stopped drinking. I've, of course, done some of the other stuff that I need to do, better diet, exercise, but I still feel like I need something else to kind of get me out, to make me a better person. And I was very interested in psychedelics and the process of getting started. Obviously, in Japan, it's very illegal, but thinking about moving to the States to try it out even.
All right, let's see what Dr. Vaid says.
Well, I think the first step is to, it's not even that available in the US. Right now, the only medicine of this nature that is available would be ketamine if you're going to do it legally, which, I think probably is the right way to go, particularly when you're talking about the layers of trauma you've dealt with the MDR, and you're really engaging in a process. So I think you have to, it is coming. I think it's not widely available, but I think a lot is going to change in the next few years when we know more. And a lot of the medical establishments, Yale, Johns Hopkins, NYU, Harvard, a lot of the big institutions are developing psychedelic centers. So it's really unfortunate that it's not here yet, but I think things are going to change in the next few years. And I do think, to speak to what Dr. Drew is saying, I think everyone is really, it's long necessary and needed, but there's going to be a lot of growth and knowledge in the next few years. So to really do your research and maybe stick with what's safe and find the right context.
In addition to what is safe, I'm curious as to what tactics we can employ in order to reduce harm. So harm reduction tactics like testing kits. Obviously, setting is very important. Intentions going into it, but how do we protect ourselves if we choose to engage with these substances?
I'll have her answer that just quick. Let me just say, I think Dr. Vaid, I think UCLA has a couple of studies underway with end-of-life dread, end-of-life anxiety, and I think mood, too. So UCLA Department of Psychiatry may have some stuff going on.
And NYU have some studies, so does Yale University, and MAPS is a really good resource because they have a lot of PTSD studies with many centers all over the United States. So you should really look up that if you're planning on coming to check out what's available in a research context.
So Paulina's asking a question of how to, if you are going to do this, how to do it. Is there a safe way if you're not in a therapeutic relationship or don't have access to care?
Paulina, I would say that I think that's what you're asking. Well, I would say, the two options really that I can see that are available is to do ketamine-assisted psychotherapy and look for a ketamine-assisted psychotherapy therapist, or if you really need to go to an underground therapist. And some of the underground therapists are extraordinarily good, but you'd have to do your research and really take some time getting to know a person and finding out where that context would be. There are some centers coming up, Synthesis and you mentioned being in Amsterdam, have a program where you can receive psilocybin truffles. Not legal. They're legal because of a scheduling issue. And so you can receive psilocybin, which is legal in that context with experienced facilitators and a lot of supervision and a medical doctor there. So there are contexts, but once again, it is that one high dose kind of experience, which I think you have to be very careful about if you're dealing with trauma, because it is the relationship, it is the integration, it is the preparedness. It's much more of a process, not a one-shot deal for most individuals. But I think really be careful, ask around, try and talk to other people who have worked with that individual so you can really have a sense, try and ask and become very educated yourself on what the process is so you really know what you're getting into.
So she's saying no outside of a therapeutic relationship.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah. But we've learned why truffle pigs go after truffles. Anyway.
But also because I feel like a lot of psychedelics, the other thing I would say is that a lot of kids have for decades been playing with psychedelics with great experiences and having wonderful experiences. I'm always amazed in my office when I ask people psychedelic history, how many people had tried LSD when they were in college 30 years. And so these medicines have always been available, even if they've been restricted. And that itself, even though people have always reported, if not having a bad experience, a very cool experience, a very beautiful experience, that alone does not seem to result in therapeutic growth or change. So I think you have to be careful with just having a great experience. If it could be wonderful, is that really a therapeutic experience, or is it just a really nice experience that you've
memory.
had? Therefore, recreational, which I'm not even being disparaging about recreational use. I'm just saying you have to distinguish between the two.
Okay.
So and you know the psychiatric part of her and the internist part of me, we are drilled with do no harm, do no harm, do no harm, do no harm.
I'm just thinking
so do no harm. It's hard to say do something that could be harmful unless we know how to do it.
So you're never going to be like, okay, here's the testing kit for this thing. I mean,
well, you are because you're. For instance, people run tents for LSD bad trips, at cons at raves and things.
No, that was
right?
at Woodstock.
Well,
I believe
Woodstock
they had a
things
tent
like that, but many raves have things like that. So because
they do at Bonnaroo.
Talking people down is go ahead, Dr. Vaid.
And also at Burning Man, there's a MAPS tent for harm reduction. So people have bad trips, and it's really important to have some of those measures in place. But I think you have to be really careful, and also particularly with young adults, you don't know what you're going to bring out in young adults. So that's the other issue. A lot of kids have great experiences, but oftentimes even with marijuana, I do see individuals, it's not the marijuana itself necessarily, but it can bring out a capacity or a tendency which was waiting in the wings, probably would have emerged anyway, of schizophrenia or something, or psych. But when you bring these things out early, they tend to be harder to treat, they tend to be more protracted, they're more difficult. Had it not come out, or had it come out 4 years later, 4 years with a developing brain can change a picture.
Right.
So are you saying wait until your frontal lobe's closed at 25 to try?
It's a little more complicated than that even. It's not about the frontal lobe so much as the brain development generally and the way mental illness manifests early and the intensity, and maybe the drugs are making it worse. We don't know. Again, the we don't know part is the difficult part. But Dr. Vaid, you've been extremely generous with your time, and we appreciate it so much.
Thank you for having me.
Again, where people will find you at the Ketamine Training Center, is that correct? The Ketamine Training Center?
Yes, that's our training center. On there should be a link to providers who are well trained in ketamine-assisted psychotherapy across the United States.
I hope this was rewarding for you. It was rewarding for us to hear.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, we
wonderful to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
And again, I want to state, it's not your everyday training that she represents, and so the combination of psychiatry and psychoanalysis, it's a pretty powerful combo. And I if you want ultimate training, that's the ultimate training. So congratulations.
It's a lot of years.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you.
And so, not everyone, for sure, not everybody has access to that.
Right, that's what I mean.
I can't even get that for people. I can't even find that. So, all right, Dr. Vaid.
Thank you for recognizing that.
I believe me, I know. Dr. Vaid, we'll let you go. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
So
Bye-bye.
it's just us now wrapping up.
You and me and me and you. Two for tea.
So what are your final thoughts? What do you heard
I feel like a criminal.
Why?
You know,
you feel like a criminal.
I don't know. It's like weird when your dad is Dr. Drew and you like live your entire life in fear that if you go to jail you won't get bailed out because Dad said on the news that he wouldn't do it.
I said that in high school. You wouldn't.
Yeah.
So
you're saying you would bail me out now?
If don't travel with any of these things you've been talking about. I might have trouble bailing you out if you do something totally dumb. But if you're not an addict, I would help you, yes. If you were part of...
I don't think I'm an addict.
No, and if we're... The whole point was about addiction, is that in a setting of addiction, you have to bring the consequences to bear.
Right.
And this is not... we're not talking about that. So.
I guess I keep thinking, because obviously we're talking to people who have access to therapeutic settings in which they can engage with these substances ethically and mindfully. And I'm thinking about the majority of people who, Joe's cousin has some LSD, let's do it.
Yeah.
How do we combat that? I almost want like a step-by-step, this is the first thing you do. You set your intentions. 1, number 2, you... test it,
I would go to MAPS on that. I'm sure they have some stuff on that there. See, for a clinician, you're
never going to say do it.
But you also, it's very dicey to be giving ways to do it. You understand?
That makes sense.
Yeah, and until we know what we're talking about, and we just don't have that data yet. We just don't have it, and and Dr. Vaid had a certain amount of confidence with it because she used it a lot, and she's in that world, and she's up on the research, and but it's still, it's very dicey. It's a very dicey landscape, and it makes me nervous. So that's why I can refer you someplace like MAPS. I'm sure they have resources for that kind of thing to advocate. Other than the safe environment and all that stuff we've already talked about, I don't think we can.
Beautiful.
Next live show is next week, so do sign up at drdrew.tv. You'll get a message when we are streaming live again. You can sign up with your email, but the best option is sign up with your phone number too, because the alerts are quick and easy, and no worries about spam, because the phone alerts are only for letting you know when we're going live and taking calls here, usually Sunday afternoon. Subscribe to our podcast, please. Ask Dr. Drew is now available as a podcast, so make sure you subscribe to this and all our other shows on iTunes, Spotify, wherever else you listen. Me and Adam every day. I have a Dr. Drew it's a little more intellectual topics, and then we have You Live, which is more addiction, and we have a Daily Dose, which we will try to keep doing on a daily basis, just a few minute Q&A thing around the scroll that you see on Periscope and Facebook. Today I've been watching you guys, and I appreciate the comments there. A lot of you are just saying thanks.
Are they talking about how pretty I am?
Some people are, and how MAPS is cool,
you.
And so let me keep saying here. I try to get as many questions as possible, and I'm going to do a special show in a few minutes where I just take questions. So do hang on if you want to.
We have 3 people still on the line, but if you're on the line, stay there because we're going to stop the show and then we're going to start a caller show.
May I put my socials and everything out? Can I? Now I'm ready to
absolutely
read my resume.
Let's do it.
Hello, my name is Paulina Pinsky. You can find me at MIZPiggy111 on Instagram.
This reminds me of the beginning
Twitter.
of Drunk History. Hi, I'm Duncan Trussell.
Oh, and don't
today
forget
we're going to talk
about
about dolphins.
Oh
yeah.
Well,
we didn't even talk about consent
I know.
at all.
Well,
That's why I've been sitting here being like, when are we going to talk about it?
Well, maybe you should come on the next show and we'll talk
Well,
about
no,
it.
we got 5 minutes or so. Do you want to just, because we've also been told
you didn't really get
we've
to-
also been told not to talk much about this. We've been instructed specifically.
Well, they're writing a book.
No, we've been instructed specifically not to
to
talk
say that?
about it.
Oh.
But we can talk about the importance of consent and how you and I are thinking a lot about that.
Yeah, I think our task in this moment is to think about consent in both a sexual context and an everyday context, and the ways in which we identify with ourselves dictate how we identify with other people. And so ultimately what I have been thinking a lot about is, how do I consent to everything?
Right. Right. We're thinking, we've been working a lot together on how consent is kind of a largely overlooked topic.
Oh, absolutely.
And that to some extent the Me Too movement has pushed it forward, and it's something that's needed to be talked about for a long time, and it's long overdue, and it's suddenly become relevant in almost every context.
Every context. I mean...
Yeah. Now, people can get sick of it, and this is part of the things we're also talking about, is some people may just not want it.
Right.
And then how do we compassionately deal with you guys, too?
I mean, I think the ultimate issue is compassion.
Yes.
How do we relate to ourselves? Are we kind to ourselves? Are we respectful of ourselves in addition to how we interact with other people? How you treat yourself is going to dictate how you treat other people. The kinder you are to yourself, the kinder you will be to others. I mean, that's the sort of life philosophy that I maintain.
Interesting. I think that's true. But I would also argue that compassion is an active process that people have to practice. All this stuff has to be practice for people to get comfortable with it too.
Empathy. Is empathy that something that can be developed, or is it an innate?
No, empathy is something that comes late. It's one of the last things that we develop as human beings. It's the highest order of our development, in fact. And it's something we develop in our interpersonal exchanges. and we have to be the object of empathy in order to develop empathy. Interestingly, so that's what Dr. Vaid was kind of talking about. That's what she's an expert in that. That's
Right.
her. That's what she does. Is she uses her whole body to empathize with other people and metabolize that and give it back to them in a form they can tolerate.
Bottom line, everybody should be in therapy.
Excuse me. There's a call for Paulina that Lindsay's pointing out that we
Okay,
should take.
all right, we'll take
All
it
right.
before we wrap this thing up. Nicole, go ahead there.
Hi, Dr. Drew and Paulina.
Hello.
It's been fun to watch you guys interact this way. I had a question. I grew up with a pastor for a father and a social worker as a mother. And I was just wondering, Paulina, what your... I was kind of laughing at you not getting bailed out. My parents said the same thing about things that we might do, and just being nervous your whole life about messing up the family name and all of those things. So I was just wondering what your experience has been like
Let me
with
just say,
Dr. Drew.
I don't want to step in the way of whatever Paulina is going to say, but we have a mechanism in place that you can do. You go on a podcast with your father and just let it all hang out and put it all out there.
I've coped by being turned into this.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. So I've spent a lot of time writing and thinking about this because I think it actually shaped a lot of my character growing up without it ever being explicitly stated. But I think, having your father be a public figure in any regard, whether it's your community or the globe, puts a special light on you, right? What they preach is going to be exemplified in you, is the pressure that I felt. It also doesn't help that my mom looked at me in the 3rd grade on the way to ice skating practice and said, when you lose your virginity, your father's going to broadcast it on the radio. So,
Did I do that?
No.
Did I do
that
it?
I know that.
Okay,
I don't know.
didn't do it.
I didn't tell you.
I know.
was like,
I wasn't expecting you to. So
yeah. So I think I put a lot of pressure on myself to embody this sort of I don't want to call you puritanical in your views or that you're a teetotaler, because I respect your work and I think that you've shaped the conversation surrounding addiction in this country in a way that is insurmountable. And so I feel a lot of pride for that. But as a kid, I didn't drink, I didn't do drugs, and I expected everyone around me to abide to that. And that did not make me very popular. So
same.
Yeah. And so I was like this goody following the rules. And then once I hit college, I was like, fuck it. Oh, can I say that?
Well, Facebook will decide. So.
Mark Zuckerberg, try me. So there was a lot of pressure I felt, and then also like People magazine would come into our house and like take photo shoots of our families. And so we would have to portray this perfect family model that didn't necessarily feel natural, but also was part of the Dr. Drew brand. And so this is actually, I'm working on a memoir. And so this will be explored a little bit more slowly when I have the time to sit down and actually work on that book. But ultimately it did feel like this shadow over me my entire life. And then I moved to the East Coast and everybody was like, Dr. Drew who? And I was like, yes, I will stay here. No one knows.
Has there been a point where, even though you felt that pressure, that what I've had a problem with is reconciling things that I've learned in my life with things that I wanted to rebel against, but I ultimately have found, okay, they were right about that. Okay, this is the best way to live my life. Or how do you believe that you, in a way, such as your drug user choice to use other substances, has that fallen away from what you were taught?
I think the voice of my conscious in my head when it surrounds like drug and alcohol is just my father's voice, which is a very nerve-wracking voice to have in your head, right? I mean, you have the leading expert in the country in the back of your skull. Half of your DNA is his. I think it will be a lifelong relationship and sort of testing. I think for me, I think that my parents are more dedicated to an aesthetic and diet plan and lifestyle that I can't subscribe to because of my eating disorder history. And so that is something that will always be challenging for me. And this may be the first time I've really articulated this, but it's very difficult when I come home and someone's on a diet and I'm not, right? And the implication is that I should be on a diet, I'm the fat one, I'm the unloved, so on. And I know that mostly is in my head, and that is not necessarily reality, but I think that in the primary way I have diverged from my family is perhaps in the way I view my body and the way in which I feed my body. And so I think that that's a place which is an ongoing conversation, right? I think I have the privilege in being able to continue a conversation with my parents and have them listen. But ultimately, I think the main place that I find like a difference is my health in every size ideology and my body positivity. And then I do drugs sometimes.
and then there's that. So
God bless
Well,
you.
you might be my spirit white girl because we have a lot of the same experiences and the same same viewpoint.
That is fantastic. I love
Very
that.
kind.
All right, Nicole, I appreciate you calling in, and thanks for being a part of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paulina.
Bye-bye.
Nice to see you.
Likewise. Or hear you.
That is awesome. I love Nicole. Okay, everybody, our last reminder, share with your friends, sign up at Dr.TV. You've got an email or text probably. We are going to be taking calls soon again and coming back and just doing Q&A kinds of stuff. Somebody told you to pose or take a pose or something.
No,
is
that
one of your
spirit
friends?
told
It's
me
your
to.
spirit told you to. They liked you. They want you back. Spirit white girl hit home with a lot of people. Courageous for sharing your story.
I like to believe that I am an active ally of trying to disinvest from whiteness and, you know.
Today's show produced by Caleb Nation and Susan Pinsky. Call screener Lindsay K. Floyd. She's the young lady you're talking to on the other side. And as I said, we're live again next week, and we'll try to do a daily dose again tomorrow, though it's only, I think, only on Periscope. Is that correct?
We're working on that, honey.
Oh, we might be able to do more
Periscope.
than Periscope?
That's a good one to start with if we have a day off from.
Are we the modern Von Trapp family? I can sing. There's a college on a hilltop.
Thank you to Dave Navarro. Thank you to Dr. Gita Vaid. Thank you to the Ketamine Training Center. Thank you to Duncan Trussell, buddy. We'll see you at the...
Dave. Did you say thanks?
I said Dave. Look for Dave.
We want to have Dave back on
He's
a
still
show.
at Ink Master. Look for Duncan on his podcast, Duncan Trussell Family Hour podcast.
Follow me on Instagram.
And be sure to please, so we can keep doing these things, check out Social CBD. You get 20% off at checkout if you go to drdrew.com/socialcbd. Use the code Dr. Drew. NeedleDestructionDevice.com. Get one of those needle destruction devices if you're a diabetic or you're running an office where you have needles. We have a couple different devices there, and they are awesome. I'm so excited to be a part of that. And I'm excited to be a part of this, and so excited you were here today. This was fun. It really was. And high five, and we'll see you next time.